The strongest men in the world aren't always the ones who know how to fight, sometimes they're the ones who notice the tears no one else sees. I didn't know his name the first time I saw him. To me, he was just another impossibly wealthy man stepping out of a black Rolls-Royce surrounded by men in tailored suits who never looked away from the crowds. The entire shopping plaza seemed to slow whenever he walked by, conversations lowering into whispers, security guards standing a little straighter, business owners nervously adjusting their jackets as though they had rehearsed for his arrival. Later I would learn that everyone in New York knew Adrian Blackwood. Newspapers called him a billionaire investor. Television hosts described him as a mysterious philanthropist. People in darker corners of the city used another title entirely. They called him the Mafia Boss who never raised his voice because he never had to. But that afternoon I didn't care who he was. I was too busy pretending not to notice that my 6-year-old daughter was limping again. "I'm okay, Mommy," Lily whispered with the sweetest smile I'd ever seen, squeezing my hand before taking another tiny step that made my heart ache. She had learned to hide the pain months ago. Children shouldn't know how to hide pain, but poverty teaches lessons no child should ever have to learn. I smiled back anyway because mothers become actresses long before they become heroes. "Of course you are, sweetheart." We stopped outside a bakery where warm cinnamon drifted into the cool October air. Lily pressed both hands against the window, watching other children laugh while carrying oversized cookies covered in colorful frosting. She never asked for one. She already knew the answer before the question could leave her lips. I checked my bank account that morning. $43.18. Rent was due in 4 days. My second job started in less than 2 hours. Every dollar already belonged to someone else. "Maybe next week," I whispered more to myself than to her. Lily nodded like she understood budgets better than first grade. "It's okay. We can just smell them." That almost broke me. I looked away before. She could see the tears gathering in my eyes. That's when I noticed him. Adrian Blackwood wasn't looking at the bakery. He wasn't looking at the expensive stores lining the plaza either. His dark green eyes followed only one person. Lily. Not with suspicion. Not with pity. With quiet concentration, like he had noticed something everyone else had ignored. His gaze lowered to her small sneakers. One shoe scraped the sidewalk ever so slightly before every third step. Barely noticeable. Barely visible. Unless someone was paying impossible attention. His expression changed almost imperceptibly. The confident businessman disappeared for a heartbeat, replaced by someone carrying an old memory that hurt far more than he allowed anyone to see. One of the men beside him leaned closer, speaking softly, but Adrian never answered. His eyes never left my little girl. Lily suddenly looked up and smiled at him, the same innocent smile she offered everyone. Most strangers smiled back politely before walking away. Adrian Blackwood didn't smile. He simply stood there, completely still, as though one tiny limp had just changed the direction of his entire life. The moment he disappeared into the waiting line of black vehicles, I convinced myself I would never see him again. Men like Adrian Blackwood lived in a different universe from women like me. They belonged in penthouses overlooking the skyline, while I counted every gallon of gas and prayed my aging Honda would survive another week. By 6 o'clock that evening, I had traded my jeans for a pale blue apron at Riverside Cafe, tying my hair into a loose ponytail before rushing onto the dinner floor. Friday nights were always busy. Families celebrated birthdays, college students filled the corner booths, and couples lingered over coffee long after dessert. I smiled until my cheeks hurt because smiling was free, and free was all I could afford. My phone buzzed twice during my shift. The first message came from Lily's babysitter. She had eaten dinner and finished her homework. The second one made my stomach tighten. She had complained that her leg hurt more than usual before falling asleep. I stared at the screen for several seconds before locking it again. There was nothing I could do until payday. I had already called 3 specialists over the past year. Every appointment ended the same way. More tests. More bills. More waiting. Around 8 o'clock, the cafe suddenly grew quieter. It was not because customers had left. It was because they were all looking toward the entrance. 4 men stepped inside wearing perfectly tailored dark suits. They scanned the room with calm, practiced eyes before moving aside. Then Adrian Blackwood entered as though he belonged everywhere without asking permission. He wore a charcoal overcoat over a black suit that fit him with effortless precision. His expression remained unreadable, but every employee instinctively stood a little straighter. Even my manager hurried forward personally instead of sending one of the servers. Adrian chose a table near the windows and quietly thanked the manager before sitting down alone. No loud conversation. No display of wealth. Just quiet confidence that somehow commanded the entire room. I grabbed my order pad and walked over because table 12 had become my responsibility. "Good evening. May I start you with something to drink?" My voice sounded steadier than I felt. He looked up immediately. Those deep green eyes recognized me before I finished speaking. "Chamomile tea," he answered softly. "And whatever soup is fresh tonight." I wrote everything down as quickly as I could. "Of course, sir." I turned to leave before he spoke again. "How is your daughter?" My hand froze around my pen. I slowly faced him again. "She is fine," I answered automatically, forcing the same practiced smile I had repeated dozens of times over the past year. "She is just a little clumsy sometimes." He held my gaze for several quiet seconds. There was no judgment in his face. No pity either. Only careful observation. "Children usually run toward the things they love," he said calmly. "When they stop running, there is always a reason." I swallowed hard, feeling something inside me crack despite every effort to stay composed. "She will be all right." I almost whispered the words because I needed to believe them more than I needed him to. Adrian gave one slow nod, but something in his eyes told me he did not believe my answer for even a second. As I carried his tea back from the kitchen a few minutes later, his untouched cup sat exactly where I had left it, but he was no longer looking out the window. He was reading a thin folder that one of his associates had quietly placed beside his plate, and for the briefest moment, I caught my own name printed across the top page before the folder gently closed. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my own name resting on the cover of that folder beside Adrian Blackwood's untouched cup of tea. By sunrise, I had convinced myself there had to be another Emily Carter somewhere in New York. It was a common enough name. That explanation felt safer than believing one of the most powerful men in the city had any reason to know who I was. Life did not pause for fear, though. Saturday mornings belonged to laundry, grocery lists, and stretching every dollar until it somehow became 2. Lily sat on the faded living room rug coloring pictures of horses while I folded clothes that had been washed so many times the fabric had almost forgotten its original color. Every few minutes she shifted her weight before quietly moving her right leg with both hands. She thought I was too busy to notice. Mothers always notice. I simply pretended not to because guilt had become easier to carry than helplessness. Around noon my phone rang from an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it. Bill collectors had become as common as telemarketers. Something told me to answer anyway. "Mrs. Carter," a calm female voice asked. "This is Grace from Hudson Pediatric Orthopedics. We would like to confirm your appointment for Monday morning at 9 o'clock. I frowned in confusion. There must be a mistake. I never scheduled an appointment. A brief silence followed. Papers shuffled softly in the background. The consultation was arranged yesterday evening. All expenses have already been covered. My heart skipped. Covered by whom? Another pause. I am sorry. I am not authorized to disclose that information. The call ended politely, leaving me staring at my phone as though it had become someone else's. I looked across the room at Lily. She was drawing a little girl running through a field with a bright yellow kite floating overhead. In every picture she ever drew, the little girl was always running. My chest tightened so much it almost hurt to breathe. Across the city, inside the top floor of Blackwood Holdings, Adrian stood quietly beside floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. His office was as elegant as the man himself. Dark walnut shelves, polished marble floors, and absolute silence except for the turning of a single page. His trusted advisor, Michael Hayes, placed another folder on the desk. "Everything you requested has been verified," he said. Adrian opened the report without speaking. Lily Carter. 6 years old. Recurrent limp. Multiple referrals delayed. Insurance appeals denied. Financial hardship documented. Recommended imaging never completed because the out-of-pocket cost exceeded the family's annual disposable income. Adrian's eyes remained fixed on one paragraph much longer than the others. A specialist had written nearly a year earlier that early intervention could significantly improve long-term mobility. The recommendation had never been followed because the family simply could not afford it. Adrian slowly closed the file. How many children are waiting because someone decided they were too expensive to help? Michael hesitated before answering. More than anyone wants to admit. Adrian walked toward the window, watching tiny yellow taxis move like scattered pieces across the streets below. His reflection looked calm, but his voice carried a quiet certainty that left no room for debate. No child should learn to live with pain because adults fail to do the right thing. Michael nodded once. "Should I continue?" Adrian never looked away from the skyline. Quietly. "I do not want gratitude. I want answers. Find out who decided that little girl could wait." Monday morning arrived with grey skies and a cold breeze that slipped through my jacket as Lily and I stood outside Hudson Pediatric Orthopedics. The building looked nothing like the crowded clinics we had visited before. Fresh flowers decorated the entrance. Soft music drifted through the waiting room. A smiling receptionist greeted Lily by name before we had even reached the front desk. Everything felt carefully prepared, almost as if someone had expected us for a long time. I kept waiting for someone to explain the mistake. Instead, a nurse handed Lily a small stuffed rabbit and led us toward an examination room without asking for an insurance card or a payment deposit. My pulse refused to slow. "There has to be some misunderstanding," I said quietly. "I cannot afford any of this." The nurse smiled gently. "Today you only need to focus on your daughter." 40 minutes later, after careful imaging and several physical evaluations, Dr. Benjamin Foster entered carrying a tablet. His expression was warm but serious enough that my stomach immediately tightened. He pulled a chair closer instead of standing over us. "Mrs. Carter, I want to begin with some good news," he said. "Your daughter can absolutely be helped." I felt every muscle in my body release at once. Tears blurred my vision before I could stop them. Lily looked between us with wide blue eyes, trying to understand why hearing those simple words made her mother cry. Dr. Foster continued carefully. "The condition has progressed more than I would have liked, but we are still within a window where treatment can make an enormous difference. With proper therapy and a corrective procedure, I believe she has an excellent chance of running normally again." Lily's tiny fingers found my hand beneath the chair. "Really, Mommy," she whispered. I nodded even though I could barely speak. "Yes, sweetheart." "Really?" Then reality returned. I cleared my throat and forced myself to ask the question that had haunted every medical conversation for the past year. "How much will everything cost?" Dr. Foster glanced down at the tablet before meeting my eyes again. "Your treatment plan has already been fully authorized." I shook my head. "By whom?" He hesitated only briefly. "The request came through a private medical foundation. I was instructed only to provide the very best care possible." I knew the answer before he finished speaking. There was only one person who had appeared in our lives with both the means and the mystery to make impossible things happen overnight. That afternoon, after Lily happily carried her stuffed rabbit back toward the parking lot, a familiar black Rolls-Royce waited quietly across the street. Adrian Blackwood stood beside it wearing a dark wool coat, his hands resting loosely in his pockets as if he had simply been passing by. There were no bodyguards surrounding him this time, only silence. I walked directly toward him while Lily admired a fountain near the entrance. "Was it you?" I asked. He did not pretend not to understand. "Your daughter deserved to see a doctor who had time to listen." I folded my arms, trying to hold on to the pride that had carried me through years of impossible choices. I cannot accept something this expensive from a stranger. Adrian studied me with the same calm expression he always seemed to wear. "Then do not accept it for yourself." His eye shifted toward Lily laughing beside the fountain. "Accept it for the little girl who still believes she will fly a kite one day without falling behind." For the next 2 weeks, my world became a strange mixture of hope and fear. Every morning before school, Lily completed gentle stretching exercises that Dr. Foster had carefully demonstrated. Every afternoon after work, I drove her to physical therapy where every tiny improvement felt like a miracle measured in inches instead of miles. She never complained. Even when her muscles grew tired, she simply smiled at the therapists and asked if she was getting closer to running. They always answered yes. I wanted to believe them with all my heart. Then one rainy Thursday evening, everything changed again. Lily had just finished brushing her teeth when I heard a quiet gasp from the hallway. I turned to see her leaning heavily against the wall, her right leg refusing to support her weight the way it had only days before. My heart dropped. I rushed across the room and knelt beside her. "What happened?" She blinked back frightened tears. "It just hurts more today, Mommy." I carried her to the couch, trying to stay calm while every terrible possibility raced through my mind. Within an hour, Dr. Foster returned my emergency call. After listening carefully, he asked us to come in first thing the next morning. The examination was quiet. Too quiet. I watched his face as he studied the new images, searching for clues before he finally lowered the screen. "The condition has become less stable than we expected," he explained gently. "This confirms my concern that we should not wait much longer. Delaying the procedure could make recovery significantly more difficult." The room seemed to tilt beneath me. I had spent so many months fighting simply to reach this point that I had forgotten time itself could become our greatest enemy. "How soon?" I whispered. "Within the next several days would be best." I looked toward Lily. She sat on the examination table hugging her stuffed rabbit, swinging one healthy foot while pretending not to listen. Children always hear more than adults realize. After we returned home, I stood alone in the kitchen staring at unpaid utility bills spread across the counter. Even though every medical expense had somehow been arranged, fear still refused to leave me. Accepting help meant trusting someone I barely knew. Trust had not been kind to me in the past. My phone vibrated softly. A single message appeared from an unknown number. There was no greeting. Only one sentence. She should be thinking about playgrounds, not hospital schedules. I knew immediately who had sent it. Before I could decide whether to respond, another message arrived. "Tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Dr. Foster will have everything prepared." I stared at the words for a long time before typing my reply. "Why are you doing this?" Several minutes passed. Then the screen lit up again. "Because children should never pay the price for problems they did not create." I read the sentence over and over until the letters blurred together. There was no promise asking for loyalty. No hidden condition. No request for anything in return. The following morning, as Lily and I stepped out of the elevator at the hospital, I found Adrian Blackwood standing quietly beside the windows overlooking the city. He was dressed as impeccably as ever. Yet there was something different in his expression. Not confidence. Not power. It looked almost like concern. He walked toward Lily first, lowering himself to one knee so they were eye level. "I heard you have been working very hard," he said with a gentle smile that I had never seen before. Lily nodded proudly. "Dr. Foster says one day I will run really fast." Adrian smiled a little wider. "I believe him." Then he stood and looked at me. "And I always keep my promises." The hours that followed moved strangely, as if every clock inside the hospital had decided to slow down for one little girl. Lily squeezed my hand while nurses prepared her room, asking questions only children could ask. Will I still be able to wear my favorite sneakers? Can I bring Mr. Bunny with me? Will it hurt for very long? I answered each one with as much confidence as I could borrow, even when my own heart was trembling. Dr. Foster knelt beside her bed and explained every step in words simple enough for a 6-year-old to understand. He never rushed her. He never spoke over her. By the time the nurses wheeled her toward the operating suite, she managed one small smile that somehow gave all of us courage. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "I will be right here when you wake up." She nodded. "I know, Mommy." Then the doors quietly closed. The waiting room suddenly felt enormous. I wrapped both hands around a paper cup of coffee that had long since turned cold without taking a single sip. Every family around me seemed trapped inside their own silent prayer. Hours passed, one careful minute at a time. I stared through the large windows overlooking the city until I heard familiar footsteps approaching. Adrian Blackwood sat in the chair beside me without saying a word. He was still dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit, yet there was nothing intimidating about him in that moment. He looked like another person waiting for news he desperately hoped would be good. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, I broke the silence. "You did not have to stay." He kept his eyes on the hallway leading toward the operating rooms. "Yes," he answered quietly. "I did." I studied his face, searching for the confidence that always seemed to surround him. Instead, I found something else. Worry. Honest, unmistakable worry. "You barely know us," I whispered. Adrian lowered his eyes for a moment before answering. "Sometimes you do not need years to recognize someone who deserves better." His words settled gently between us. They were simple, but they carried a weight that made me wonder what kind of memories had taught him such certainty. Another hour passed before Dr. Foster finally appeared. He removed his surgical cap with a tired smile that reached all the way to his eyes. I stood so quickly the chair nearly tipped over behind me. "Doctor?" He smiled wider. The procedure went exactly as planned. I covered my mouth with both hands as tears spilled freely down my cheeks. Relief arrived so suddenly that my knees almost gave out beneath me. Dr. Foster continued, "The next several months will require patience and therapy, but everything we hoped to accomplish today was successful. She has an excellent chance of making a full recovery." I cried harder than I ever had in my life. Adrian quietly stepped back, giving me space to absorb the moment without drawing attention to himself. When Lily finally woke later that afternoon, she looked sleepy but peaceful. The first thing she searched for was my face. The second was Adrian standing quietly near the doorway. She smiled weakly and lifted one tiny hand. "Did I do okay?" Adrian walked over slowly, careful not to overwhelm her. "You were the bravest person in the building today," he said. Lily giggled softly before closing her eyes again to rest. As I tucked the blanket around her shoulders, I noticed Adrian watching her with an expression I had never expected to see from the man the entire city feared. It was not pride. It was not satisfaction. It was quiet gratitude, as though watching one little girl sleep peacefully had somehow healed a place inside his own heart that no amount of wealth had ever been able to reach. The weeks after the procedure settled into a new rhythm built on patience instead of fear. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Lily walked the bright hallway of the rehabilitation center, holding tightly to the colorful handrail while her physical therapist counted each careful step. 1 step became 3. 3 became 10. Every small victory felt larger than anything money could ever buy. She celebrated each milestone with the same bright smile that had first caught Adrian Blackwood's attention outside the bakery. One afternoon, while Lily practiced balancing on a soft foam mat, I wandered into the family lounge searching for a cup of coffee. A stack of folders rested neatly on one of the tables, waiting to be delivered to different departments. My eye stopped on a familiar name before I could look away. Lily Carter. I knew I should not touch it, but curiosity overcame caution. Inside was a letter explaining that every future therapy session had been permanently funded through the Blackwood Children's Medical Foundation. Another document showed that the rehabilitation center itself had recently received a substantial investment that allowed dozens of low-income families to receive treatment without waiting months for approval. There was more. An administrative report revealed that an independent review had uncovered serious failures in the insurance process that had delayed care for multiple children, including Lily. New policies had already been introduced to prevent families from facing the same barriers again. I quietly closed the folder, overwhelmed by the realization that Adrian had never focused only on my daughter. He had changed an entire system so other children would not lose precious time. That evening I asked Dr. Foster if he knew anything about the foundation. He smiled thoughtfully before answering. Mr. Blackwood requested only one thing. He said no family should ever know his name before they know there is hope. I drove home in complete silence. The city lights reflected across the windshield while Lily slept peacefully in the back seat, exhausted after another successful therapy session. For the first time in years, she had fallen asleep without rubbing her aching leg. A few days later, I found Adrian sitting alone on a quiet bench outside the rehabilitation center, reading reports while waiting for a meeting inside the building. I walked toward him carrying 2 cups of coffee. He looked up with mild surprise as I handed him one. "Thank you," I said softly. He accepted the cup but did not answer immediately. "For Lily?" he finally asked. I shook my head. "For every child whose name I will never know." His expression remained calm, but I noticed the faintest smile touch the corner of his mouth. "Children deserve opportunities," he replied. "Not obstacles." I looked at him for a long moment before asking the question that had quietly followed me since the day we met. "Why did you never tell me everything you were doing?" Adrian stared across the playground where several children laughed beneath the afternoon sun. "Because gratitude was never the goal." His voice was almost lost beneath the sound of happy voices drifting across the park. The goal was hearing children laugh without pain. Just then Lily carefully walked toward us using only a single therapy cane instead of 2. She beamed with pride as she reached the bench. "Look, Mommy. I almost did the whole sidewalk by myself." Adrian stood and applauded softly, as though she had just accomplished something extraordinary. Maybe she had. Watching the two of them together, I finally understood that the strongest form of power was not the ability to command a room. It was the quiet decision to change lives without ever asking to be thanked. Autumn slowly gave way to winter, and with every passing week Lily grew stronger. The therapy cane disappeared first. Then the careful hesitation between each step faded until she walked beside me with a confidence I had almost forgotten was possible. One Saturday afternoon the rehabilitation center hosted a small family celebration for children who had reached important milestones. Bright balloons floated above tables filled with homemade cookies, and every hallway echoed with laughter that sounded wonderfully ordinary. Lily spent the afternoon decorating paper stars with the other children while I thanked therapists who had become more like family than medical professionals. As the event began to wind down, Dr. Foster quietly approached me holding an old photograph inside a simple wooden frame. "I think someone wanted you to have this," he said before walking away. The picture showed a little girl about Lily's age sitting on a swing beneath a large oak tree. She had bright green eyes, dark hair tied into 2 small braids, and the same fearless smile Lily wore whenever she believed anything was possible. On the back of the frame, written in careful handwriting, were only 6 words. "She loved to run more than anything." Confused, I looked around until I noticed Adrian standing alone near one of the windows, watching snowflakes drift across the parking lot. I carried the photograph toward him. "Who is she?" My voice barely rose above a whisper. Adrian looked at the frame for several long seconds before answering. "My younger sister. Olivia." It was the first time I had ever heard sadness enter his voice. "She was 7. He folded his hands together, searching for words that had clearly remained buried for many years. "She began limping one spring. Everyone believed there would always be more time. More appointments. More tomorrows." He paused as though each memory weighed more than the last. Life does not always wait for tomorrow. I felt my throat tighten. There was no anger in his eyes. Only quiet regret that had learned to live beside him. I could not help her, he continued softly. I was young. I had no influence. No resources. I promised myself that if I ever had the ability to change someone else's story, I would never hesitate again. Suddenly every unexplained kindness made perfect sense. Every phone call. Every appointment. Every silent act of generosity. None of it had begun with wealth. It had begun with loss. I reached out and gently returned the photograph to him. You honored her, I said. Adrian lowered his eyes before carefully placing the frame back inside his coat. I hope so. At that moment Lily ran toward us carrying a paper star covered with glitter. She stopped in front of Adrian and held it high above her head. I made this for you, she announced proudly. Because heroes deserve stars. Adrian accepted the crooked little decoration with both hands as though she had entrusted him with something priceless. His usually composed expression softened into the warmest smile I had ever seen. Thank you, he whispered. Lily wrapped her small arms around him without hesitation before skipping back toward her friends. Adrian remained perfectly still, looking down at the glitter now sparkling across the front of his dark coat. For the first time since I had met him, I noticed moisture gathering in the corner of his eyes. He quietly brushed it away before anyone else could see, but in that fleeting moment I understood something that wealth could never hide. Even the strongest hearts sometimes spend years waiting for one small act of kindness to finally begin healing. 1 year later, the first warm Saturday of spring painted Central Park with fresh green leaves and bright blue skies. Families filled the walking paths with bicycles, picnic blankets, and laughing children chasing one another across the wide open fields. I stood beneath the same oak tree where volunteers from the Blackwood Children's Medical Foundation had organized a charity family day for children recovering from orthopedic treatments. Looking around, I recognized dozens of smiling faces that had once carried the same fear I used to hide behind tired smiles. Doctors talked with parents like old friends. Therapists played games instead of leading exercises. For the first time, the building where healing had begun no longer felt like a hospital. It felt like hope. Lily stood beside me wearing white sneakers with colorful laces she had picked out herself. She bounced lightly on her toes, unable to keep still. Dr. Foster crouched beside her with a grin. Are you ready? He asked. Lily nodded so enthusiastically that her ponytail bounced behind her. I have been ready for a long time. A small crowd gathered quietly along the path. Therapists, nurses, volunteers, and families who had walked similar journeys all smiled with gentle anticipation. 50 feet away, Adrian Blackwood waited beside the finish line with his hands resting calmly in the pockets of his navy jacket. The paper star Lily had given him months earlier had been carefully framed inside his office, but today she had made him another one that rested proudly inside his breast pocket. Dr. Foster looked at Lily one final time. Whenever you are ready. Lily looked toward Adrian, took one deep breath, and then she ran. Not carefully. Not cautiously. She simply ran. Her arms swung freely. Her feet struck the ground with confidence. Her laughter floated across the park like music I had dreamed of hearing for years. Tears blurred my vision before I even realized I was crying. Every impossible day, every sleepless night, every whispered prayer suddenly became worth it as I watched my little girl race across the grass without fear. Adrian opened his arms just as Lily reached him. She wrapped him in the biggest hug her tiny arms could manage before looking up with shining blue eyes. See, she laughed. I told you I would run really fast. Adrian smiled, but this time he could not hide the emotion filling his eyes. You certainly did, he whispered. And I have never been happier to be proven right. The applause around us faded into the background as I slowly walked toward them. Standing beside Adrian, I realized I no longer saw the mysterious billionaire everyone whispered about or the powerful man whose reputation filled newspaper headlines. I saw someone who had quietly transformed grief into compassion and influence into opportunity. You changed her life, I said softly. Adrian gently shook his head. No. She changed mine. He looked across the field where dozens of children laughed, ran, and played together beneath the spring sunshine. Success once meant building an empire. Now it means making sure one more child gets the chance to chase a dream. Lily slipped one hand into mine and the other into Adrian's before leading us both toward the rest of the children without asking permission, as though she had already decided we belonged on the same path. I smiled through grateful tears because, in that simple moment, I finally understood that real strength is not measured by the power to control lives. It is measured by the quiet courage to lift someone else until they can run on their own, and sometimes the smallest footsteps are the ones that leave the deepest mark on the strongest hearts.